afterwards. Thanks very much, Lisa. I should have said yes, we're going to record this section. So I think we'll pass over to Laura and Beck. If that's okay.
Thanks, Emma. Hi, everyone. I'm just going to share my slides, so bear with me one moment, please. So can everyone see that okay? Yeah, lovely. Thank you. Oh, sorry, getting this. Okay. Yeah, so hi everyone, it's really lovely to be here to share our experience and be part of the discussions today. Yeah, so as Emma said, I'm Laura Jacobs, I'm the Senior Research Involvement Officer at Parkinson's UK, and we were invited to talk about some of the guidance for researchers on PPI or involvement in lab-based research that we've developed in partnership with colleagues from the Alzheimer's Society and University College London Hospital. And I want to acknowledge at this stage from Parkinson's UK, this work was led by colleagues Natasha Ratcliffe and Annie Amjad, who've since moved on to new roles. So today we're going to give a bit of an introduction on why the project came about, how the resource was developed, a little look at the resource itself and some of the tips and experiences from the researchers and PPI contributors who were involved. I'm going to, as Emma said, leave time for questions and discussions at the end. So really looking forward to this as an opportunity to kind of share ideas, challenges and learn from each other. And a quick note on terminology that we wanted to mention is we're mentioning using both the terms patient and public involvement contributors or people affected by health conditions in this presentation to hopefully include people with health conditions, their partners, family members, friends and carers, members of the public who work in partnership with researchers on research. And when we know that people have different preferences or terms that they identify more with, and that different terms may be more relevant in different contexts. So we just wanted to acknowledge that there. So some of you may be very familiar with involvement, but for some of you it may be new. So I'll start with what do we mean by involvement, and although the three are linked, how it differs from engagement and participation. So participation is easiest to think about as when people take part in a research study. So for example, when people are recruited as participants in a clinical trial. Engagement, a lot of us are familiar with. It's when researchers are sharing information about their work to an audience, for example, to a lay audience, be that a science festival, a talk, presenting to a local group, for example. And involvement means actively working in partnership with patients and members of the public to plan, manage, design and carry out research. So it's research being carried out with or by members of the public rather than to, about or for them. And that's one of the definitions from the Involve group and the NIHRUs. So the benefits of PPI, so patient and public involvement in clinical research, have been shown time and time again and are relatively well documented. It helps to make research more relevant, more feasible and practical for participants, and so helping with recruitment and retention. But impact is broad ranging, and it isn't just on the research itself, but also for the research team who may be more motivated, gain different perspectives and ideas for future research. And also for the PPI contributors, people feel more empowered and there's an opportunity to learn about research and also meet people affected by the same condition. However, there is less out there about patient and public involvement in lab-based research, and sometimes how to meaningfully involve people in this research and the impact of doing so can sometimes be less clear to people. And so that's the area that we're focusing on today. These stages of research sometimes referred to as basic research or lab-based research or preclinical research. So in this pipeline of the research process, we're looking at the first two circles here and looking at research that doesn't have humans taking part. So there are challenges and barriers, I think, in PPI, in any type of research, and yeah, there's still some way to go for involvement in research being completely common, embedded in the research process. On this slide, we're talking about some of the perceived challenges and barriers that come up when we're talking about involvement in lab-based research. So researchers in the lab may have little or no contact with people affected by the conditions they're studying. So that raises questions on, you know, how to actually build those connections and reach out to people, and how to work with people. There isn't a culture of involvement in lab-based research yet. So part of that is there's less awareness of what involvement actually is, how people might be involved, and also the support to do so. It may be harder to explain than clinical research, and that's not to say that it's not a challenge in clinical research too. But in lab-based research, you often have complex and unfamiliar topics or terms, different levels of scientific knowledge, and different terminologies that are just used when talking about the research. So it can be difficult to communicate about the research. Where it's so early in the pipeline and removed from people taking part, some people feel that it may be less relevant to them to be involved, or maybe it's a case of sometimes people are less clear on how they might be meaningfully involved in the discussions about lab-based research. And also finding opportunities to be involved. We did a survey of PPI contributors that we work with, and for those who said they hadn't been involved in patient and public involvement in lab-based research, a common answer was because they just hadn't seen the opportunities to do so. And we recognise that some of these are challenges across other types of research too. So we believe that patient and public involvement can and should happen in all types of research. Involving people in lab-based research ensures that research is focused on what matters most to people from the start of the research and development process. And also for people affected by health conditions too, it can give hope and empowerment, which is important. And involvement can happen kind of at, these are stages of the research cycle, I guess. So involvement can happen at any of these stages in the cycle, but it should happen where it's appropriate and adds value. And that doesn't necessarily mean across all of these stages. It's not a one approach fits all, and it will depend on your research, your time, your resources. We've seen lots of great examples of patient and public involvement in lab-based research, often at that kind of identifying and prioritising the research question type stage, or also in the dissemination stages, but also in design and elsewhere across the cycle too. And we were finding that there was interest from researchers and PPI contributors to work together on lab-based research, but something that we were often hearing from lab-based researchers was that they didn't know where to start. Something that we were hearing not only at Parkinson's UK, but other colleagues supporting patient and public involvement were hearing this too. So we started talking about what we could do in this area. So I'll hand over to Beck to share more about the project.
Thanks, Laura. So yeah, as Laura said, there isn't much out there for researchers who are working in the lab. So this project was initiated by one of the big London teaching hospitals, the University College London Hospital, their biomedical research centre. So that's a big research centre attached to that hospital, and they were coming across this issue that Laura's described about lab-based researchers either not seeing why they should do it, or even if they thought they could do it, not really understanding how to do it. So they found a very small pot of money, and they agreed to fund or work with 2 charities to develop some guidance. So as Laura said, Parkinson's UK were really interested in this, and the Alzheimer's Society was the other charity that wanted to work with this. And the agreement was we would try and co-produce some guidance in partnership with researchers and people with lived experience. So I came in to work with this project to develop the guidance. So can you move on to the next one, Laura? So I'm just going to talk briefly about how we put the guidance together. We found 6 research projects, all lab-based research projects, being run across the 3 organisations. So Parkinson's UK were funding 2 projects, Alzheimer's Society were funding 2 projects supported by University College London Hospital. And I talked with the researchers leading those projects before the project started and asked them what they wanted to achieve through involvement. What did they feel about it? They were all really anxious about it, actually, but what did they feel about it? What did they want to do? And I also talked to the PPI contributors before the project started. And then I talked with them all again after some PPI had happened. So it wasn't when the whole research project had finished, but just after some of the PPI had happened. And one of the things that came up a lot from both PPI contributors and researchers was how vital training and support was, training and support and guidance. So not just written guidance, but the support of people like PPI leads in universities or in charities who could give like practical advice and support and help to run things. But so after the interviews, as I say, people told us they thought some guidance would be really useful. So we held a workshop with the researchers and the PPI contributors, brought them all together in a room, and they told us what they thought the guidance should contain, what they thought we needed to talk about. And then we put together a draft website, and they then commented on that. And I really want to acknowledge all of the PPI researchers and the contributors who helped us with that development. So if you go on to the next slide, Laura. So this is what the guidance looks like. It's a really simple website. It was developed with no budget at all. It was developed by the amazing Natasha Ratcliffe, who Laura said has now moved on to another job. So it's fairly simple, but we've had really very positive feedback on it. So I'm just going to show you a few of the pages, and we're going to send you the link to this guidance out after the event. So you'll get that through the Eventbrite link. So if you can go on to the next slide, Laura. So as I said, the emphasis is on practical guidance, and there are 4 different key sections. The first section is this one, before you start. So it looks at the key things that researchers, lab-based researchers, need to do before they get carried away and think they're going to set up a discussion group with a load of patients. So it takes you through each of these, you can see each of these things you can click through to follow the discussion, but it takes you through what PPI is, how it adds value, how you can find any support available, and what resources you might need in order to involve people. So that's things like encouraging researchers to think about setting aside some time, finding a bit of money, and at the time we wrote this, which I'll come back to, accessing some kind of a meeting room. And the next slide, Laura. The next part of the website takes researchers through a series of questions to help them think about how they would plan an activity and how they would budget for it. And the next one, Laura. And then the next section of the site gives some advice about running the activity. When we were working on this project, so we worked on it between 2019 and very early 2020. So this was pre-COVID in the UK, and all of the researchers had run a face-to-face activity to involve patients and carers, and had found that that worked really, really well. We did during COVID, we adapted the website and added some guidance for what to do if you are running an online activity. But we know that the patients and carers who got involved felt that going to the labs and meeting the researchers was really, really helpful to the project. If you can go on to the next slide. And then the final part that I'm going to talk about here is the follow-up. So one of the things that comes across, this is for PPI activities, doesn't matter whether they're lab-based or clinical. A lot of people will say, well, I did something and then I never knew what happened afterwards. You know, I gave my views, nobody told me what happened as a result. So we put this section in because PPI contributors said, please get the researchers to tell us what they did afterwards, even if they didn't do anything, just get them to tell us that, and that would be really helpful. There's lots of other stuff on the website. Would really encourage you to have a look at it. One of the other areas that we've got on the website is a series of case studies. So I'm going to ask Laura to talk about those now.
Sorry, just coming back off mute there. Yes, so as Beck mentioned, there was a number of case studies that we that are on the resource, just for people to have examples, to see it's researchers sharing about kind of what they did and why. So just to highlight, we've highlighted two. I don't have time to really go through all of them in detail, but would encourage you to go have a read. So Tony Vernon is a researcher at King's College London, aiming to develop biomarkers that could help identify subgroups of Parkinson's at an early stage in the condition. And just to say, not all of the case studies are on Parkinson's. I've just highlighted these two as that's where I'm from. So Tony was planning to submit a grant application and wanted to seek the views of people affected by Parkinson's on this topic and on his research plans. So he held two focus groups, and there's some tips on kind of how he planned for that in the case study. But I just wanted to share this quote from Tony, and I don't normally read out directly from the slides, but I will do. He said, "I had a very interesting conversation with someone living with Parkinson's at a workshop run by Parkinson's UK. He asked me why we wanted to develop biomarkers for a disease where there's no cure. I thought it was an interesting question. Parkinson's UK asked research funding applicants to show evidence that they've engaged with people with Parkinson's to get a sense of how useful the research might be. So I wanted to see if people felt our research could be important." And he said the response was overwhelmingly positive about the research we described. Everyone seemed to think it was a good thing, and so that obviously inspires us to keep going. And I think I just wanted to share that quote as it kind of highlights why Tony wanted to do involvement, but also that involvement can raise questions and cause researchers to ask questions about their own research or think about it from a different perspective. But also some of the impacts from this is, it's around the motivation for researchers, and sometimes impacts aren't always quantifiable, but they're no less important and they're not to be underestimated. Rod and Olive were two of the PPI contributors of the 6 who joined the focus group with Tony, and their insights and tips can be found in the guidance and resources, and as Bex has already said, they gave their thoughts on the guidance that was being developed. But I wanted to also share a quote from them on the impact from their perspective. And so they said, patients and carers who get involved in lab-based research will always get something back from meeting the researchers. And in the blog, which I've linked at the bottom there, and we will share after this workshop as well. But they were talking about finding it interesting and educational, and they learned about the research and about Parkinson's as well from taking part in the activity. But they also felt that it was good that they felt that they could help people to understand what it is like to live with Parkinson's and add that context to the research. And then Rod also said, if you're going to start projects including lab-based research, it's good to have discussion upfront to make sure that what you're doing is worth doing for the people with the condition. And so, that kind of links back into that kind of identifying and prioritizing, making sure the research area is relevant to people and that the research is ultimately for. And the second case study, just want to highlight quickly, is Rachel Hughes, who's a PhD student at the University of Sheffield, researching a novel drug that targets mitochondria, using neurons generated from the skin cells of people with Parkinson's and also animal models of the condition. And Rachel wanted to hear from people from the Parkinson's community, their opinions on her research idea and on the use of the different model systems. So Rachel also held focus groups, and so Parkinson's UK, I should mention, for both Tony and Rachel, we helped to support them connecting with people and what the focus groups might look like, and just general advice and practical tips as well. And just to mention that focus groups are not the only way to involve people. It just happens that the two we've highlighted here are focus groups, but also
Sorry, Laura, I think you've gone on mute.
And almost forget why you're doing it. So I think meeting people with Parkinson's and their families really helps you to remember why you're doing it. So I think, again, highlighting that motivation and that broader understanding of the condition. And then Rachel said, for this project, PPI didn't have a massive impact on the research because the protocol has already been agreed, but I think it would make me consider different options further down the line. Patients told us that they would much rather see us doing work in the patient cells than necessarily a lot of animal work. And I think so that two of the impacts that really came out of this was definitely looking at the direction and design of future research. So the lab, I know this lab now hasn't moved as much of the research that they were planning to do into animal models, and are continuing a lot of those experiments in the cell lines from patients. And Nicola has Parkinson's and was one of those in the focus groups. And again, we have a blog where you can find out more about her experience and tips, but I wanted to highlight this quote as impacts from Nicola's perspective. So she said, "I think we help the researchers to have a greater understanding of Parkinson's and what it's like to live with the condition." So again, that kind of putting the research into the context of the condition and that motivation element. And she also said, we all had different views about how animals are used in research. Once we'd had a discussion, we could all see that sometimes using animal models is valuable, but sometimes it wouldn't be as valuable because the systems of the animals don't necessarily reflect the systems in humans. And I think this was another impact from this, that it helps to raise awareness and understanding of preclinical research and its importance, and also topics within that. So understanding around, for example, animal research or other elements of research. So yeah, they're just two examples to highlight, but we also have seen lots of great involvement in, for example, getting input on designing plain English summaries, dissemination of the results of the research, and people advising throughout the project. And when we spoke to the researchers and PPI contributors involved throughout this project, we found there are lots of ways that PPI adds value. And these are just some of the examples that were highlighted from researchers on the research and the researchers themselves. So again, you can see helps focus research on priority areas that are more meaningful, gain new insights, motivation for researchers, building communication skills, linking with patient organisations and funders. It's another way that it helps to build that connection, raises awareness of and importance of lab-based research, like we were just talking about the animal research, and helping in planning further grant applications. And it's not just, as we said, the researchers where there's value, who benefit or get value from these activities, and PPI contributors told us about the value they gained from their experiences too, and some of these will be familiar from the earlier slide that we shared as well. So around empowerment, that opportunity to meet other people with the same condition, for example, to learn about the research in the condition, and similarly to link with patient organisations and funders. So we just wanted to end briefly on some thoughts around that question of where to start as well. And we know lots of researchers are doing great engagement, and great involvement in lab-based research often stems from good engagement. And Tony mentioned this, I think, in his quote. So we know that building relationships is key, and the importance of good communication was really highlighted to us from both the researchers and the people taking part throughout this project. But understanding, like Beck mentioned as well, that there needs to be the support and the guidance for people to connect and have these conversations. So although we started talking about the differences and the differences between engagement, participation, and involvement, I think the line between involvement and engagement is a bit more blurred in lab-based research, and it's kind of about starting to build those connections and have those conversations, and how can we support that to happen. And then Beck, am I handing back to you for this one?
Yeah, I think you are. Last slide, nearly last slide. But so we're still, after doing this project, we still feel like we've got loads of questions. We certainly don't feel like we've cracked it. And this slide just gives you some of the questions that we would love to explore with you in a minute. And it may be that Emma, Doris, and her PPI Ignite working group have also been thinking about these questions and might have cracked them. But I just want to pick out a couple of things from this. One is that you can't just work with early career researchers to support PPI. You have to think about how you encourage people who are professors to be supporting it as well, because otherwise early career researchers will never have the time, be given the time to do it. So for us, that's a really key question. We'd really like to think about, how do you change the culture in lab-based research so that it just becomes the normal thing that you do, that you involve? You shouldn't have to think about it. You should just be doing it as part of your research. And we wonder if one of the things that might help that is if we could encourage research funders to require lab-based researchers to involve patients or carers when they're requesting funding applications. So I think we're going to stop there. Really, thanks very much for having us, but we'd really like to open this up to discussion once Emma has had her say.
Great, thanks, Beck. I'm just going to share my slides. If Emer might let me share my slides there. I'll just have a few to help pinpoint along the way.
You sound so calm, Emma. When you can't share your slides, you're still calm.
It's okay. Worst
Emma,
case scenario, it's no problem. I can go without slides. It's no
you
problem.
should be able to, because I've made you co-host. But is it coming up on the bar below?
It
No?
is coming up on the bar, yeah.
All right, great.
But I think one of the things that Beck just said about not just targeting ECRs, the early career researchers, is really important. And what we're going to talk about is kind of a learning and development aspect that we're doing. Part of it is that we have developed an open education resource for doctoral students, but we had a huge amount of conversation about that around where should we first target, because at the end of the day, doctoral students are transient in the research culture. Not all of them stay within the culture. So although they can be really influential and very on board, if we want to embed it into the actual culture, we need to be able to influence upwards as well as training those that are coming into research. And that's not one we've cracked yet, Beck, but certainly one that we are working on in the background as well as you. So I'll just very quickly run through a few bits. Okay, so just to give an overview for those of you who don't know who PPI Ignite Network are, in Ireland there are 7 national lead sites across different higher education institutes in Ireland. We also have 10 national partners, Queen's University being one of them. Within this, we have 5 work packages, and in work package 1, it's around building capacity. And lab-based research was one of the areas that was highlighted for specific attention needed in order to build capacity within this area. And so through that, what we did was we developed a subgroup on lab-based research with 2 key tasks, one of which was to look at what was already in existence in terms of resources and training for lab-based research. And then the other one was to address any gaps that were there and to help support learning and development within this area, not just for one university or one organization, but across the entire network. So as part of that subgroup, we had a mixture of people from higher education institutions, but also from a number of patient organizations and health research charity organizations that actually fund research. So the likes of the Irish Cancer Society and Breakthrough Cancer Research. And this work package was led by our colleagues in DCU and the Health Research Charities Ireland. So we had a good mix of people together with different views. We had funders' view when they see funding coming in and people trying to understand how to embed PPI in lab-based research, but not quite getting there. We had the researchers' view, and we had research management as well. So what we decided was that we'd come up with an accredited 5-credit module for doctoral researchers. So much like they take many modules on good practices in research, this would be one of them. But we'd also do a companion set of learning and development for people with lived experience about what academic research was, what lab-based research was, so that they could understand it better, and they themselves then would be able to understand how they can contribute. And the way we've designed this is that there's natural crossover between these 2 modules, so they can be run in tandem with the researchers contributing to the lived experience module and the people in the lived experience module contributing to the doctoral module as well. So that it's essentially in practice through the modules. So in order to develop it, we looked at what was needed necessarily for accreditation on the academic side and what would have been needed by, for example, people that take courses and people with lived experience who take courses. So we engage with the likes of IPOSI on that side, which is the Irish Platform for Patients Organisation in Science and Industry. Then we had a workshop, an online workshop, to get feedback on what we had thought as a group from people that might actually be taking these modules. So we had 5 people with lived experience and a potential interest in lab-based research. And we had 9 doctoral students from 5 different education institutions across Ireland. We're quite advanced in the doctoral module, and we've divided it into 3 sections. So we have PPI concepts, which is about those underlying practice, PPI versus participation, all those kind of aspects of it, responsible research and innovation. Then we have a really important section, which is PPI skills for the lab-based research. And this looks at skills that are not typically taught for lab-based research. So even things like critical reflection, how you do reflective practice as a researcher. It's something that isn't taught in a lab-based setting, but can be really, really beneficial if you're engaging in PPI. And then we have practical workshops as well around certain things about how you facilitate and interact and how you can work together with people with lived experience to understand things like impact. And these have been informed by other aspects of what we do as a network as well. We're less advanced in the PPI contributor workshop. We have the format based on what people have given feedback to us, and we have an idea of it, but we're finalizing that in November with people, not patient organizations, but actual individual patients that might be looking to take a module like this to see what they actually need from it. But the key points around how we've developed this is that it's going to be an open education resource, which means that any higher education institution can take it off the shelf and accredit it through their own pathways, and therefore have a ready-made co-designed module in place. And it has been co-designed. There's flexible delivery within it as well. So we've done it so it can be an intensive 1-week course, or it can be a 1 module per week doctoral module type. Similarly with the PPI companion module. The mutual learning aspects, so part of the assignments for this is around developing content and engaging with the alternative companion modules. So you get this inbuilt crossover and this mutual learning, so that you are actively, through doing the module, getting used to working with people who are not academics if you are a researcher, or getting to work with people who are academics if you are a PPI contributor, which sometimes is the hardest part, is just making those first initial connections. So, and just to note, we're funded by the HRB and the Irish Research Council as a network as a whole. And if you need more information on this beyond today, you can contact myself or Sarah Delaney, who's our contact for work package 1 on this. So that's a really quick whistle stop, but I think it's important that you get to ask your questions. So very quick flyby on what we're doing in the background in the national network there. Okay.
Thanks very much, Emma, and thank you to Beck and Laura as well. It was great to hear everything that's going on. I want to open up the floor now. If anyone has any questions, you can either raise your hand. I think Melissa is going to be looking for raised hands. And also, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat as well. But I wanted to start off with a question, if that's okay, if there aren't any coming up. To Beck and Laura, I was wondering, did you come across many researchers who had actually changed their projects as a result of PPA and contribution into the project?
The 6 that we looked at as part of this project to develop the guidance, as Laura said, there were some projects where things changed afterwards, so not necessarily on that project, but on the later one. But certainly, I think the biggest change was in researchers themselves. That was the impact that I thought was most interesting, was researchers who had been either really anxious about involving patients or really reluctant to do it, just quite well, in one case, quite cross about it, like, why should I do this? I just don't see the point. I haven't got time. Shifting to saying, actually, that was really useful. I found that discussion really reassuring, or it made me really rethink things. So yeah, that to me, that was the biggest change. It was about attitude. I don't know if Laura's got anything to add to that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think as well, from supporting researchers in kind of other projects as well that aren't featured in this guidance, we've definitely seen, changes in, it's not just in a specific research, but it's, I think particularly we see it at that early stage, like helping to identify or prioritize research questions or areas to focus on as well. So definitely we worked with one researcher who had kind of 3 potential areas that he was not sure on what that he could focus on going out of research, and he put that to people, saying, kind of trying to understand which of these is most important to you, and that helped him decide which one he was going to take down through to the next kind of funding application. And definitely big impact in kind of dissemination of the research as well, like sharing the research, often asking people in the community, kind of helping to explain research clearly, and then actually where to reach out to share that research. Often asking people in the community is the best way to share that. And also kind of thoughts on, with supported people understanding thoughts on stem cell research, for example, and if there are different things they could change there, and what it's a lot around the identifying and prioritizing, I think, is what we're seeing at the moment.
I've got a question there from David.
Oh, thanks very much. And thanks to all the speakers. Those were really useful and interesting talks. I appreciate you giving your time for this. I just have a question. I had the privilege to hear Derek Stewart here in Galway last week, and it's really great. But one point that he made was that for patients, it can be kind of intimidating for them to be asked to come onto a university campus or into a research lab, a space that they mightn't be so familiar with, and that seems to kind of be at odds with what you were saying, Becca, around the usefulness of that, and I'm trying to reconcile those two things and wonder what your advice would be there. Is a mix of different locations maybe the best approach, or just keen on your thoughts on that, please. Thanks.
Yeah, good old Derek. Derek ran the workshop. He facilitated the workshop that we did for part of this project. Really interestingly, one of the researchers who was part of this project ran her first discussion group in a Pizza Express. I don't know if you have Pizza Express in Republic of Ireland, but or in Northern Ireland. But yeah, she ran the first one in a restaurant. She invited everybody to come and have pizza with her. And she paid for that. So she paid for everybody to come and eat dinner. They had a private room in the local Pizza Express, so people weren't worried about talking about their condition. This was an Alzheimer's project, and yeah, so she didn't want people to feel embarrassed about talking about their condition in a restaurant, so they used a private room. Another project that we did that we looked at was a cancer project, and the researcher invited people not to the oncology centre, but there was like a cancer support centre down the road, and he invited them to that for the first meeting. So people got to meet in more of a neutral venue. And but then they said, we really want to see the lab. We want to see where you're doing stuff. Right. So often the second meeting, then people would get a tour around the lab, which maybe for a lab researcher might be a bit boring. But if you've never been in a lab, it can be really, like, I'm not a researcher, and the first time I did it, I was like, wow, this is what they look like. This is dead interesting. Yes. So yeah, so we did, it was, but some people actually started in the lab which wasn't attached to the hospital. So I wonder if that makes a difference. But I do think Derek's right. It's really important to think about where you run a meeting, at least the first meeting, to make sure it doesn't put people off. And that's why we say in the guidance, it's part of the planning thing, like before you even think about where to meet, think about, have you got any money? because you can't meet in Pizza Express unless you're a very rich researcher and you've got money to pay for everybody's dinner. So think about those sorts of things first. I don't know if Laura or Emma want to add to that, but that's what we found.
Yeah, completely agree.
Thanks very much.
I think as well, there are small things that can do to help people feel more comfortable as well, and just about kind of having some of those conversations via email, maybe when you're kind of setting up meetings as well, and just some small things about giving clear maps and guidance on where and what they can expect and where to find things, and there might be someone to meet you there to introduce you, just so that people have that kind of knowing what to expect and what things will look like when they get there. For example, some people find that helpful, just sending an email, for example, with the Google map and some instructions on as well, and just that connection via email. And also the value of online meetings as well. I think both researchers and like PPI contributors have said, like, there's not, some people prefer it in person and some people are very happy with online. It has different values being online, benefits being online as well, in that people can do it from home, and you may get, you're not kind of linked to a certain geographical location, and you might get different perspectives in that way. But again, with that, some people are less familiar or unable or haven't used the technology before. So I think always having that introduction guidance and information, for example, then joining a Zoom call, what that might look like and how to do that. So I think there are things that can be done before as well, to just help build that connection before even turning up on the day. And then Emma, I think.
Yeah,
that's great.
We would always kind of recommend that you would meet on a neutral venue site for the first meeting. So we wouldn't recommend, UCD is not a good place for anybody to meet. Even if you work in UCD, it is a huge nightmare to navigate. But even if it's not UCD, we recommend going somewhere that is not owned by the researchers or owned by, well, sometimes owned by the PPI contributors is okay, but it's not only just for the location, it's also for the power dynamics. If you're bringing it out of the university, out of the lab, out of the hospital setting, you're meeting people more on a peer-to-peer basis. And that's one of the big drivers where we say, at least for that first meeting, try and go out into the community where the PPI contributors are most comfortable, not where the researcher is most comfortable, because that's going to be help with that. There's always an issue of power imbalance, and that's just a small step to help with that. And if you can, depends on everybody, it's great to just pick up the phone and have a phone call with who you're meeting beforehand, just to say hello, to introduce yourself, because then they just know you're a human person that they're going to meet, and not Dr. whomever or Professor whomever. And that can really, really help as well. So for the first meeting, after that, you just ask where people are happy to meet, what they like to see, and then go from there. Would be how we do it. Yeah.
Very helpful. Thanks very much.
Sorry. We've got a question there from Elizabeth. Her hand up.
Hi. Thank you for the talk today. I found it really informative. I just have a question. I'm doing my PhD in the RCSI, and I'm coming to the last kind of year and a bit of the project. I started in the middle of COVID, so the PPI aspect of the project that was supposed to be done hasn't got around to being done at all. So I'm just wondering how at the end of a project can you kind of incorporate a bit of PPI into the research? Like, we'd like to be able to kind of tick the box that we've included PPI in the project, because that was the aim from the beginning. But just with COVID and everything like that, it just ended up being somewhat impossible to try and include it. So have I kind of missed it by trying to include it at the end of the project, or yeah, what can I do?
You want to start, Laura?
I think there are definite ways. I think kind of that last slide I mentioned at the end, that there can be that kind of blurred line between engagement and involvement. I would encourage kind of trying to set up kind of just some meetings and starting to have those conversations, for example, with people if you have any kind of connections that you can reach out to, or that organizations might be able to help you if you have PPI contributors in mind. And I think that can definitely lead to, you know, just actually the questions that people ask may bring a different perspective to how you talk about or how you think about the research as well. I definitely think there's scope for dissemination of research, involvement at that level, talking about, you know, how you communicate your research. We've kind of been trying to support with some roles where it is that mixture of engagement and involvement, and it's just people meeting semi-regularly to discuss the progress in the research so far. People can ask questions, and then that might shape kind of next directions or any steps. So I think it's kind of hard without knowing specifically more, but I think there is kind of opportunities. I don't know, Beck, if that.
Yeah, I think it's never too late. But in a way, I think it's the same with clinical research. You just have to be really honest with people about how much they can influence and where you are in the process. So I think, Elizabeth, people will be really interested to hear about your project and help you with the things that Laura said, but just wouldn't, I know you wouldn't do this anyway. I'm sure you wouldn't do this anyway, but I think it's about not saying to people, yeah, you can really shape our research, because you can't, but maybe they can help you shape the next piece of research you do.
The next one. Yeah. Okay. That's great. Thank you.
Good luck.
Thanks.
I'll just add to that. I think anybody who's doing this needs to take a really strategic approach to their research and understand where influence is possible within your research. You know, not all aspects of your research are able to be influenced from an external collaborator, be they a patient or otherwise. So, you know, make sure you're bringing in people where there is actual decision making still, or a possibility for them still to influence your work. And they're the times that you bring people in and engage and focus on you know, the areas really downstream, or the areas that are influenceable, I suppose.
Other questions?
I wonder, could I ask a question, Emer? If that's all right, I'll hop on. And I totally agree with what you've just said right there, because in my head, I was wondering about, you know, like really fundamental research, you know, some random protein-protein interaction, and how could that be made pertinent? So I appreciate that point you've made about there is influence in particular parts of research. So I guess I'm thinking about, you know, the doctoral module sounds so interesting. I think it could be so powerful and important for doctoral students. But what about for those of us perhaps who work with undergraduate students? Are we missing a trick if we don't start introducing these concepts to them, because they are the early career researchers of the future? So, you know, just maybe anyone's thoughts or views on that point. When is it the appropriate time to introduce PPI into the vocabulary of scientists, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, we do give a lecture to undergraduate medicine here in UCD, and it is by far the hardest lecture I have to give, because they're just not familiar with the research system at all. So I think in terms of when do you introduce it, hopefully it'll be introduced, and it is being incorporated more and more. At the same time that there's talk about research ethics, research integrity, research data, then public and patient involvement will be one of those key corners of good, responsible research and innovation. At least, you know, it should be part of that natural conversation with research. So there are pockets of it being done, but yeah, the undergrads, until they actually have experience of research, I have found it's a very difficult thing to explain.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I've tried doing teaching with undergraduates on involvement in research, and to be honest, we gave up with it in the end. It just felt too early. As Emma said, if undergraduates don't understand what research is, or if they come from a culture where patients having a say is so foreign, if you've only got an hour, it doesn't really work. So we've done it, particularly teaching at master's level. On the kind of vocational stuff. So there's a master's in clinical trials run at University College London, and we do 2 modules within that on patient and public involvement, and that seems to have really influenced sort of early stage trialists to do some stuff. But again, you have to get over this thing about if there are people coming from cultures where patients having a say is very foreign, it can be really challenging. I think I don't know if it's the same in Ireland, but we take for granted that people will ask their doctor questions. That's not the case in every culture. So
there's a question in the chat, and it was something similar that I was going to ask, actually. It's about non-early stage researchers, so professors who maybe have been doing their own thing for a long time and, you know, maybe are a bit reluctant to change their ways. What's the advice around that?
See, I'd say, I don't know what Laura's going to say, but this is why I think we should start requiring it in a funding application, because for me, the thing that speaks loudest to senior researchers is money. What have they got to do, given how busy they are? What have they got to do to get research funding? So I would really like to see more organisations requiring some level of involvement as a condition of funding. But I don't know what you think, Laura or Emma.
I think it's a tricky one, that, because there's a risk, like I agree, sometimes that's the way to come in and get kind of attention in one way, but there is a worry that sometimes if you mandate something, it can be tokenistic if there's not the support there for it to happen. So I think it's at that balancing act of, like, we need to make sure that there is the support and the understanding and the awareness as well. I think one thing that would be great, I think sometimes it's people seeing examples of where it is being done well and getting it out there. And I would personally love to see kind of involvement being less siloed in publications and conferences. So, for example, people that are doing it, encouraging them for it to be in their methods and publications, not just the PPI publications, but, you know, the publications that are in other journals as well. So it's starting to be more part of the process. And also if people have done it and then talking about it at conferences, so people start seeing that happening and the impact, I wonder, I think would be great. But yeah, it is tricky.
Yeah, and I think particularly, I think it's really important to reach those people that are, you know, permanent within the research system. But like many things, it's a competition for time, and the traditional way we do it in terms of giving a training course, etc., often doesn't work for people of that level. So it's embedding it across other different parts of the research culture and the research system. So I think it is the most important. So even having, not only requiring it perhaps, or having it as for research funding, but also having representatives as the reviewers on panels, because they interact then with other reviewers who are academics, and they can see the benefit then of that knowledge through that system. We in UCD have now managed to put it on the faculty career framework. So you can be, you know, you're accredited for it, you get credited, there's value for it in your promotions framework. But I think it needs to be a much more embedded approach across the research ecosystem to really have good impact on those who are kind of, I suppose, further down that pathway than the early career researchers as such. Yeah, I mean, we've tried to engage them with training, but it's just very, very difficult in terms of competing time issues.
We have a raised hand from Aidan there.
All right, I think that's me up. Sorry, hello everybody. I don't have a question, but if you don't mind, I just want to make a couple of points, if that's okay. I'm part of Melissa and Emer's hub in Queens, and they're obviously very proud of the work they're doing. And I'm a member of the Cancer Forum in Belfast, and in recent times, ACRI, which Emma would know about, the All Ireland Cancer Research Institute, you know. So therefore, I suffer from imposter syndrome, because really my background's teaching and education. So there I am in with the doctors and the professors and all of that. But my medical background is that I'm a patient, and I'm a blood cancer patient, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and I'm quite happy with the fact that there is no actual cure for my particular condition, and that's the way of it. And I've had it for 10 years now, so not doing too bad. but it is there in the background and it is very active, and that's it. So, you know, I therefore very interested in PPI, very supportive of all you folk. I'm very proud of all the work you do. So, and that's a very genuine thing. And we things, I know what was Elizabeth, she didn't mean anything by it, but you know, the idea of PPI, where can I, sorry, where can, you know, it's ticking the box somewhere. I mean, as the patient, and that frightens us because we become part of, and I'm only using that, I'm not pointing fingers, but it's often said, you know, well, we'll tick that box. It's not really what we want to hear. It's a bit like those applying for grants coming in at the 11th hour. Could we get a wee bit of PPI in here to bolster this up? Now, you will all be aware of that, and we'll have seen it happen. But it's happening less now, and that's the good thing about it. But I think our researchers, and I spoke to some of the new doctoral or PhD students in Queen's there, I think it was 2 weeks ago. I think people need to know that there is a career out there in research from a very early stage. Now, I would obviously go back to schools when children are coming through, that they know research is a career. But you see, when students, you know, enter their university and enter their departments, whether it's as a medic or whether it is as a STEM student in some way, that they should know that there is a career pathway in research, because we have to get those people then. It's no, you know, it's no use this, what would you call it, this appearing out of the blue when they've got the master's level and they're applying for grant aid, let's say for a PhD. I think Emma's idea, that module on PPI, I think it's excellent. I mean, I think that's the way forward in this. It's very, very important. But from my point of view, yeah, a first meeting outside of a medical type environment is very good. I don't know whether we're talking the likes of Macmillan, who have those who go there maybe for respite during treatment. There are tables, there are coffees, and there's this safe environment for a patient to go to where they feel happy. And I'm sure Beck and Laura would understand that, but that's very important, and that cup of coffee is very important. But been shown around the research centre is excellent, and I quote the Paddy Johnson Centre in Belfast is excellent, and they have open tours at time. Well, COVID hit that in the head a bit, but the engagement there with public and indeed with patients is excellent, because it doesn't smell like a hospital, you know, and therefore it's very, very exciting. But when your student, or when your PhD student is involving the patient, I think from my point of view, knowing where my future lies in this here, it's this idea that we don't need anyone coming along to waffle to say, well, we're working on this cure, you know, because you're not necessarily working on a cure, but you're going down that path. I look at things for the next generation, but people like me are watching every movement that person projects. They're listening to every word. I'm looking at their face and how they're reacting and where they're looking. I'm looking for anomalies. I'm looking at their eyes, all of those things that you may not even take on board. But people like me are doing that, because in my case, cancer, it can be frightening. And it took a lot for me to get up, get dressed, and go down to see you. So I'm not looking for, you know, what would you call it? My expectations would be different from yours, but I think it's so important that we do engage with people like me. And I know that my group, outside of the hub, which is important to me, but the Cancer Forum, we support research and the research applications mainly from Queen's students, and that's where we do our little bit. So I think all grant applications should have a PPI aspect to it. So I think I've actually used up too much of your time there, so sorry about that. But carry on with the good work. Very proud.
Thanks very much, Aidan, and thanks for your contribution into the group as well in Queen's. We really appreciate it. I don't know if Beck and Laura want to say a few words. I think we've run past the time anyway, but it was a great discussion there.
And I think, Aidan, we have run out of time, but I think you raised some really important points, Aidan, and particularly about researchers not over-promising what they've, I think some researchers get anxious and say, this research is really important, it's going to find a cure for whatever. And actually, we need researchers just have the courage to say, this might be a tiny step, it's not going to be a huge step. It is, help me with this small step, because most of us who aren't researchers don't really understand what I thought. When I got involved with researchers, I thought it was all men in white coats when I started being involved. So yeah, I agree with you.
Thank you.
And absolutely that point around, it should, and Emma mentioned it earlier as well, about it's got to be where there.
Did Laura freeze again, or is it? Yeah, she
Yeah.
did.
Yeah, I think she did, yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
do you want to finish off with Emma, a few words, Emma, just while we're waiting on Laura?
You're back,
Laura, you
Laura.
froze.
Sorry.
Sorry, I just got flashing up saying nearly made it through the whole thing, but internet unstable. Sorry, I'm not sure what you heard, if I said anything at all.
You only said a sentence and then you froze.
Oh, sorry. Just very quickly then, just to say, yeah, I completely agree around the point you made about things. It can't be tokenistic at all. Involvement should be where there is value, and it's got to be meaningful. And it's just about having those honest conversations about where that can happen, like Emma mentioned earlier. So yeah, thank you. Completely agree. And thanks for your comments as well, Aidan.
I'll just finish up by saying just 2 points. To the researchers in the room, just remember that your methodology and your research are not the same thing. So you may not be able to involve people within your methodology, your cell culture, your protein-protein interactions. It doesn't mean you can't involve them within your research. Your research is much wider than that. So just always remember that point. And the other thing is that it's about collaboration. It's about good working relationships. So, it's about starting small, being transparent and being respectful with the people that you're with, and building upon that as you become more experienced, being able to build up on that. So never feel that you have to start with a big giant focus group or something. Small conversations start really, really good involvement activities. So,
Great, thank you. Thanks so much, Emma, Beck and Laura. That was really brilliant today. And thanks everyone for attending. And we'll send out the links that were mentioned earlier. Thanks very much.
Thanks.